Welcome into the Through the Whistle podcast as a part of CHSN. That's Jake Butt right there. Played his football at the University of Michigan. I'm Joshua Perry, played my football at The Ohio State University. We are taping this episode as we are on the precipice of the first ever 12-team college football playoff. We got Notre Dame and Indiana facing off on Friday night and then a slew of games on Saturday. Before we get into some of the action, Jake, how you feeling?
Man, I'm feeling great. And I mean, let's just talk about how we are feeling, going into this. This is new, 12-team playoff. It's almost crazy for me to reflect and think about, when I was being recruited, there wasn't even a 4-team playoff. Growing up, obviously there wasn't a playoff. And then kind of in our time transition to the 4-team playoff. Then once we leave, we embrace NIL and the transfer portal. We have conference realignment, and now the kicking off the 12-team playoff. This sport is completely different than the one we grew up watching. This postseason is night and day from the one we played in. And I know people have different opinions on if it's good or bad or if they love it or hate it. One thing that's certain is back when we were playing, Joshua, if you tried to put 12 teams in, it's not like March Madness where upsets can happen. It's basketball is different. When we were playing, there was probably 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 or 5 teams max that had a real chance at winning the title. I'd say this year you could sell me on a number of these teams making a deep run because no team's perfect. So I'm excited for that, for the parity, and to watch some football.
You really think there are more than 6 teams that are truly capable of winning it all?
You knew the number. 6 is a good bet. I mean, let's go through them real quick. Yeah, I like Oregon. Obviously, sure. Georgia has the history, right? I think Texas is the odds-on favorite. Ohio State, I still love their roster. Obviously, I still love their roster. Notre Dame, I like them for a number of reasons. Run the ball, play great defense. That you can always sell me there. Penn State. Look, if they don't start as slow as they did against Oregon, and if they could have beat Oregon, then they could beat anyone.
Okay, so I feel like now you're really trying to. So Penn State lost to the 2 best teams they played all year. Texas lost twice to the only true contender that they played all year. Like I would say that the number is probably more in the 4 or 5 range. You might be able to talk me in.
But on any given day, though, but I'm sorry to cut you off.
Upsets
but listen,
used to happen all the time. We watched Michigan lose to App State in 2007.
Yes, and we watched Ohio State lose to Michigan in 2024.
I know. I'm just trying to make the point that I'm not exactly sure that this thing's so far different that I feel good about having 12 teams in there.
In the postseason, though, Michigan losing to App State is different than 2011 Alabama against, say SMU or whatever. Like in the postseason this year, we've thought of Georgia as the gauntlet. They're super vulnerable. Okay, they're super vulnerable. Whether it's Notre Dame or Indiana that wins, I see a world where either of those teams can beat Georgia. Okay, I'm saying there's no true juggernaut team in this postseason. There's not, in my opinion, there's not one juggernaut can't miss pick to win the national title.
I agree with that, but I don't think Arizona State is a true contender. I don't think Boise State is a true contender. I don't think SMU is a true contender. Like, we can run down the list of teams. Like, I have legit questions about Texas at their very top end because we haven't seen them beat a team at that very top end. I have the question about Penn State. They lost to the 2 best teams that they played. And even Ohio State, we think that they can go toe-to-toe. They went toe-to-toe with Oregon on the road, but still, like, best win, what, Indiana?
Yeah.
I mean, and this is not to discredit Indiana, which, by the way, have not seen them beat a team that we believe is a true contender. Like,
that's what I'm saying.
The point that I'm trying to make is I haven't seen enough from some of these teams to believe that on that given Saturday, they've got the horses to beat what we know Georgia to be at their top end, what we know Oregon to be at their top end, what we know Ohio State to be at their top end. We have not seen that.
There's upsets can happen or wins happen because a team is a true juggernaut. So, like, okay, again, I'll go back to like any of those Alabama teams, were true juggernauts. A team like Arizona State, though, you're right. But can't you see a world where Arizona State could beat any of the other 11 teams on any one of
Not
these
any
days?
of them, no. Absolutely not.
Not any
No.
of them.
Not all of them. I could see them beating some of them, but not all of them on a given Saturday.
Who's the ones Arizona State could never beat?
They're not beating Oregon. They would need catastrophic Dylan Gabriel play or catastrophic Dylan Gabriel injury for me to feel like that could happen. They're not beating. Now, Georgia's a big question mark for me because of the quarterback situation with them. We don't know if Carson Beck is healthy. But this has nothing to do with like the new era and all this other stuff. It's like quarterback got hurt, right? Like quarterbacks get hurt every year. So I do have the question there.
They look vulnerable even with Carson
They certainly
Beck.
did. But when they needed to bring their A game, they did.
True.
Like when it was time to ball, they did.
True.
And so like I can count on that happening for them. I don't think Arizona State is beating Ohio State. Like even with the offensive line issues, like I think Ohio State still got too much for them.
To help defend my point here, my take is, again, I go back to these juggernaut Bama teams that won or whatever it is, where they were so deep. Even your Buckeye team. Think about your Buckeye team. You lost 1, 2. You're on your third string quarterback, but you were so deep at so many different places it didn't matter. Georgia, okay, they lose their quarterback, sure. They're not deep like those other teams because of the new era of the transfer portal and NIL. This talent has been spread out. That's an undeniable truth, to the point where that is a big reason I believe that this has been the year with the most parity we've ever seen. And I wouldn't be surprised to see chaos. I'm sure it's going to be a predictable national champion, but not every favorite is going to win every game here in the postseason either.
The thing that you basically just talked me into is this is a playoff that rewards teams that can be healthiest in an era where you have player movement.
True. Right? You agree with that. You agree.
I tend to agree with that, but it doesn't.
When we played the best teams, when we were playing the best teams, you could kind of afford injuries. Man, when we would play you guys, there was a number. I feel like every year when Michigan played Ohio State, you guys would have a significant injury at a key position. And you didn't root for it, but man, a good player goes down and you're like, okay, thankfully we don't have to deal with that person anymore. And then in comes another dude and it's an NFL player. I think JT Barrett went down, in comes Dwayne Haskins, immediately rips a back shoulder fade for like a beautiful pass down the sideline. And it's like, my goodness, the depth that some of these teams had because the talent was so much more concentrated back then.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I don't think that this thing necessarily makes me believe that more teams can be more competitive, nor do I believe that it makes I don't know. This doesn't change a whole lot for the way that I view the sport still. I agree that parity is probably as strong as it's been. I also look at the idea that Indiana's guys in the trenches are not beating up Georgia or Texas's guys in the trenches. They're just not doing that. It's the reason why they struggled with a team like Michigan. As poorly as Michigan was built this year, Ohio State's backup offensive line was not playing with them dudes up front, right? Like that, I cannot get that idea out of my head that when you're Arizona State, like Clemson's dudes in the trenches can probably beat you because they're a more talented group. It's a really hard thing to develop. And they will continue to have that edge as long as they're able to get like 5-star dudes out of high school, high 4-star dudes out of high school, and then supplement them through the portal. As we've seen the Texases, the Georgias, Ohio State to a point needs to do better. But even with some of the injuries, they kind of like the guys that they have because it's Ohio State and that's what they do. Right? Like that, I can't avoid thinking about how that is going to be a mismatch for any of these teams. And don't be the group of 5 team either. As much as I love Boise State, and we saw them go toe-to-toe with Oregon on the road, as much as I like that team, I watched enough of them throughout the year to say, I don't know if they can pull off that performance they had against Oregon once they get into the show against all these teams.
I know. Listen, you're right. And you're especially in the trenches. That's a huge difference. I guess what I'm saying is things have changed to the point where no longer does a team have chain link mesh armor followed by, Valerian steel followed by another layer of
gosh.
worn out leather, like to the point where it's like you just can't penetrate them no matter what. Like there's vulnerabilities where no, Arizona State or Boise State is not hanging with Georgia or Texas in the trenches. But on any given day, and I don't think I could have said, I couldn't have said this 10 years ago, that Arizona State was going to take down a top 4 team even on any given day, because some of those teams were just so freaking stacked that in a have-to-have-it moment, you weren't going to win. I would not be surprised again to see some serious upsets. And some of these spreads are huge in the first round. And but we don't know what to expect. Home field advantage, some of the different weather. Right. Who knows? We're all speculating anyways. I mean, this is a brand new world we're entering.
Last thing I'll say is the team that I played on won a national title. We lost to Virginia Tech, who was I believe a 6-6 team that year. Barely made a bowl game. If they did, they might have been 5-7. I'm not exactly sure. They were not a good football team. And the point that I'm trying to make is I feel like we've made a lot about the upsets, and certainly it feels like if you were in that second tier, I feel like that's where some teams have grown, right? Where, Penn State feels better about going up against Ohio State and Oregon than they probably would have in the past. But there's still this idea that sits in the back of my mind that we've seen upsets before. Good teams lose to bad teams. So when you get to this point in the year, this is where like the true contenders, and if you recruited right and you got the right coaching staff, people's blood starts boiling a little bit differently when they get into the postseason, and you don't see the slip-ups. It's not the time for slip-ups. That's week 2. That's week 6. It's week 8. That's a rivalry game where you can throw all of the records out and you can throw all the history of the teams out. In this scenario, I feel like this is where the best teams just go out and do what the best teams do.
I get it. No, I get it. I get it. I'm excited to watch. Listen, I'm
too.
really excited to watch. And I'm rooting for chaos too.
Here. I am. I'm rooting for it. Like, this is Mr. Negative Take. Oh, he must hate the 12-team playoff. I hate what I think people want it to represent, what people think it means. Anytime I can get football, I love it. I want to watch every single one of these games. I want to be invested. To your point, I think some of these lines are too big, and maybe that's me wish casting that these games are all going to be really close competitive games. I'm not exactly sure there, but in the grand scheme of things, I'm more in wait and see mode for the impact of all the different things that have happened to this sport. Before we get into game previews, I do think we should talk topically about the game of college football here. I wanted to start with this. In some of the non-college football playoff games, as well as some of the college football playoff games, we have seen players opt out. In the kind of lower bowls now, and I'll use your alma mater, University of Michigan, as an example, they've got some guys who are going to be very high draft picks. They've decided that it is not worth it to risk injury or embarrassment or whatever else to go out there and play against Alabama. I do not necessarily fault them for making that decision. We had a backup quarterback at Penn State, Bo Pribula, who was almost backed into a corner of what decision he had to make. Drew Aller's coming back. He's a guy who plays on that offense and knows that if he was somewhere else, he'd probably be the lead quarterback. Very talented, and needed to leave the team and hop in the portal so he could take visits and he could be recruited properly. James Franklin, the head coach there, fully understood it. I think you and I fully understand that dynamic, and it's a problem within the sport right now with the calendar. But you have a unique experience in terms of opting out. And I want you to share that, and then I'll kind of share some of my experience with the postseason as well.
Yeah, I feel like I'm honestly one of the poster childs. So if we just go back in time and think about this, this is a foreign concept, okay? When we were both freshmen, this unheard of. It's simply, it was so beyond, it wasn't even in anyone's imagination. Like, there was no conversation to be had. Oh, you're in a bowl game, you're playing, draft pick or not. So then in 2015, Notre Dame is playing in the postseason. Jalen Smith, talented stud.
Who was playing in that game against Notre Dame?
It was Ohio State?
It was us. That was my last game.
It was Ohio State, right? What?
Yeah.
Okay. Jalen Smith was like the perfect prospect. This guy was
Yes.
unbelievable, had started as a freshman, great athlete, great leader. He was projected as a top 10 pick.
Yes.
Bang, tears his ACL. It was more than an ACL.
Tore
It
his
was a
whole
really
knee up.
nasty injury.
Yeah. Full
And
blowout.
had nerve damage in the surgery. He went from a top 10 pick to an early second round pick. So, and I'll tell you my story in a second. Top 10 picks are making 20 million plus. Early second, you're talking 7-8 million, I believe. It was over 10. It was an 8-figure reduction in salary. Now he had insurance, so he made some of that back. Okay, so Jalen Smith goes down in 2015. 2016, I had just won the Mackey. I was a 2-time All-American. I was projected, it was a deep tight end class, but I took out an insurance policy. The way they do that is they scout you and they set an income number. I was projected as the 35th pick in the draft. Maybe would have went a little bit, maybe not, couldn't have got there, who knows, but that's what insurance projected me as. So I'm getting ready to play in the Orange Bowl, and as we're practicing, the TV, ESPN's going around. Christian McCaffrey sits out. Whoa, unheard of. Leonard Fournette then sits out. Whoa, what's going on? Both guys top draft picks, first rounders. So I remember some of my teammates asking me, hey, are you going to sit out? And I was just like, it was still foreign to me at that time. So I play in that game, and I tear my right ACL. That was my second time tearing that ACL. So I went from if the 35th pick in that draft was going to make $6.5 or $6.7 million, I was the first pick in the 5th round, $2.7 million. So a $4 million difference. Plus, we're not even talking about the guaranteed money. That's what most people see. Here's the interesting thing that there's layers that because I got hurt outside of the NFL, instead of being on designation to be IR, injured reserve, a lot of our viewers probably are familiar, I was on NFI, non-football injury. That's what happens when you get hurt outside of the team's facilities. If you're riding a motorcycle and you get injured, you go on NFI. Because I was on NFI, I did not get a Madden check. That's about 20 grand. I did not get a 401k match. That was a little under 30 grand. I didn't have benefits. I didn't have medical or dental benefits. I made a split salary. So my contract that you guys see online, I didn't make that. It was an over 6-figure reduction in my salary. I didn't get vested, meaning towards my retirement for my line of duty disability, all this other. The real cost beyond the $4 million surface level reduction was multiple 6 figures, probably when you talk about over a lifetime, $500,000. Easily. The other piece that I think is very underrated here is when you play in these bowl games, you play on January 1st. You then know where you're going to start training for the combine. So you fly out there, you probably take a few days off. And then the first week, you're not really going hard in the gym because your body's still beat up. You got to recondition your body to get into the weight room. So you don't really start training for the combine until like the last 10, 15 days of January. If you opt out after Michigan plays Ohio State, you say, I'm done. That's now December 1st, you make that decision. You're training for the combine before Christmas. And by the time those guys start training, which is the end of January, you have a whole month of training done. That's another piece that I think is very underrated here is not only are you reducing your risk of getting injured, but you have an entire month of additional work leading up to the combine. So that's most of it. I'll say this, JP, last thing is when we talk about bowl game opt-outs, I think college players observe and they look at coaches leaving. Brian Kelly, Notre Dame is the one that always stands out to me. And listen, $100 million to go to LSU and all the benefits, great. But he left at a point in time where I believe Notre Dame, the playoffs hadn't been announced. Notre Dame had a backdoor chance of potentially getting into the playoffs. And Brian Kelly just left to go to LSU. So why would an 18-year-old stay loyal to schools when the coaches do? So thanks for giving me the full floor there. That's everything, Will. That is the full scope of these bowl game opt-outs.
No, I mean, it's a really intriguing thing. I'll go back to that Fiesta Bowl that you were talking about with Notre Dame, and I was on that field, played in that game. It was the last game I played in college, and it was a really unique place to be because I remember the lead up to that. And just to run it down for you, we had Ezekiel Elliott, who was the 4th pick. I think Joey Bosa was the 3rd pick. We had Eli Apple, who was drafted in the top 10. Taylor Decker was the 18th pick. We had Darren Lee, who was the 20th overall pick. Von Bell, Mike Thomas, who were second-round picks. Nick Vannett, still playing in the NFL, was a third-round pick. Adolphus Washington was a third-round pick. Myself and Cardale Jones were fourth-round picks. No, he had transferred out. Noah Spence had some issues there, but he was a part of my class. So I left one guy out, I know for sure. Braxton Miller, third-round pick. That was 12 guys I just named off that were all fourth-round picks or higher, right? 5 first-round picks. You talked about the guaranteed money. All these dudes, like bare minimum they were ever going to make in the league, those 5 guys was at least $10 million apiece, right? Like there was so much on the line. And there was not one conversation between any of the guys in that locker room about whether they were going to play in that game or not. We were playing New Year's Six bowl game. We were pissed off because we probably could have gone back to the college football playoff the next year had we not lost to Michigan State, and we did. But it was unfinished business for us. And
you say that was the most loaded team in Buckeye history. You said that team was better than 2014, right?
That team I think is better than 2024 as well. But that's a different conversation for a different day. The moral of the story that I'm trying to get at, though, Jake, is that was our decision. That was what we felt was the right thing to do. That was, and it was kind of foreign. It was unpopular, this whole opt-out thing. I'll make the argument Bradley Roby was one of the first opt-outs I ever saw. In 2013, we played in the Orange Bowl, and he was just like, oh, no, I'm hurt. He wasn't hurt, but neither here nor there. Very foreign concept for guys to say that they were going to leave their team and not play. So we made our decision. I also look at some of those guys and say, boy, you rolled the dice a little bit. And so I do not fault any of these people for saying that they're going to make one time in their career that they're going to make a selfish decision for the betterment of their professional career. I can't hate on kids that do that because and now it's a little bit of a different day and age. We played that game for free for so long. And so if you say one time you're going to turn down the opportunity to play the game for free, I don't think that's a crime.
Right. No, it's and again, so first off, Bradley Roby, the way it was labeled, did you consider what was that like in the locker room? Did you consider that an opt-out? Because I remember now that you mentioned it, Bradley Roby, getting hurt. And there was some speculation, but no one labeled it as that at the time, which is interesting.
No, but we knew he could have played if he wanted to. We labeled it as a business decision, which is exactly what it was at the time. He made a business decision about and here's the other thing I'll throw out there. If you're I'll just say this. One more game of tape ain't going to change what the NFL thinks about you.
No.
If I would have gone out in that Fiesta Bowl and I would have had 22 tackles and 3 sacks and 4 TFLs and a pick 6, I still would have been a 4th-round pick in the NFL.
Nah, you would have been that'd get you to the 2nd round.
No, I'm hands in the barn at that point. It's like, and I think that's a part of the thought process too. So it's very one-sided when I think players are criticized for opting out of bowl games. It's very much look at what this university has done for you. Look at the platform it's put you on. Could you really do that to your teammates, the guys that you fought with? And it's like, yes, I can. And I think that they should understand that I've given everything to them for the last 2, 3 or 4 or 5 years or whatever the case is. And now it's time for me to just do this one thing for me. Yeah. And I think generally people have to understand that.
Yeah. No, listen, and it's a good way to just approach things like no one owes you anything. The players don't owe us as fans anything. And listen, it sucks. Like, hey, these as a viewer, I love watching bowl games. As you mentioned, I love watching football and competitive football, and I love watching 2 foreign teams meet in a random stadium and compete. But don't you agree with me that I feel the coaches leaving that's the number one reason I have no issue with players opting out? Because if a coach is going to bounce before the bowl game when he's still under contract, how am I going to knock the players?
I mean, they've been doing it for as long as, I have
I
been observing the
I
sport is guys moving around and what made it worse, I think, too, was with the early signing period as well, where now you've got these high schoolers who thought they were going to be playing for one guy, and this college one guy was going to be coaching them in a bowl game, and he just dips. It feels very
yes.
nasty. The NIL has kind of balanced things out, but there was also a point for me too where it's like all the dudes who are getting all of the money are the ones who get to make the most selfish decisions every time. And the guys who are
Right.
poor are the ones that have to deal with consequences of doing one thing one time that doesn't benefit the team. So we can put this one to rest. We got a lot more to get to, but just some food for thought for people out there as they're consuming some of the content around guys opting in, opting out, wherever the case is. I wanted to briefly talk about my experience in the 14
Yes.
college football playoff.
Yes.
We were in it in the inaugural year of that format, and I think it's a good time to kind of get into the mentality of the players as they prep.
Yes.
So I think I've told this story before to you, Jake. I don't know if I've told it on here, but in 2014, we won the Big Ten championship 59-0. And we go back to Columbus, and as we're making our way back, the one of the flight attendants comes on the overhead and gives us our schedule, which is something that would typically happen. And basically, it was to be determined was the schedule. So Urban gave us the mandate: go watch the rankings release show, and after you're done watching that, we'll figure out what we want to do. He was a guy who didn't want to be like Mike Norvell was a year ago, embarrassed on TV that their team didn't make it in. I think Rhett Lashley, the SMU coach, did it this year where he didn't call a watch party. So we watched this thing happen in real time because we had no idea how the committee was going to value a conference championship, a big blowout win like that. None of these things had happened before because it was the first time the committee had to make a selection. We got in. We get a mass text right away, 2:00, be there. And we walk in the doors. And it's different than what they have right now. We had more time. It was more like the timing of a traditional bowl game to get ready. We walk in that door, and it was the most serious environment I had ever been in. And Urban Meyer walks to the front of the room, and he looks us dead in the eye, and he says, "We got Bama." There's a backstory to that. It would take too long to tell here, but you and I have talked about the chase. We, as a program, were chasing the standard of the Alabama dynasty at the time. He looks at us and says, "We have Alabama." Then he goes into this whole thing about Alabama's D-line is one of the best you would ever see. I don't know how we're going to block them. Their linebackers are big and fast and physical. Zeke, you better pack your lunch. Says a secondary that can lock anybody down. Mike Thomas, I want to see you working on top end releases and everything all throughout bowl prep. Then he starts going over. They've got the best running back in the country in Derrick Henry, and they've got Amari Cooper who might win the Heisman Trophy. So they've got first rounders on that offensive line. And he built this thing up like we could never beat them. Not on our best day were we ever going toe-to-toe with Alabama. And as the days went on, as the weeks went on, it was more like, hey, you know what? I like the way that we look out there. He's like, Amari Cooper, really good player. He's like, you know what? We might have a plan for him. And he just, kind of boils it down until the day we play the game. And I think like Auburn and Wisconsin had they played in a bowl game. Wisconsin put it on them. And Urban just looks at us before we go out there. And he says, the SEC really thinks they're all that. And they just got their ass whooped by Wisconsin. And he's like, those guys can't play with us. They can't hold our jock. And we ran out on the field, did what we had to do. There is so much unknown that comes through here. The selection process, all the teams on that Sunday were like, what's going to happen? Where are we going to land? How is this thing going to work? Right? Then you get to the actual matchup. And as you mentioned, a lot of unfamiliarity. We might get some rematches down the line, but a lot of unfamiliar teams that are going at it. And you have to build a certain mentality to prepare yourself for whatever comes off of that opposing sideline. And so for these guys, I think they have to, and the hay is in the barn for most of them. The work week is done. Right now, it's the mental game that they have to work. There's this preparation curve that I think the great teams know how to approach. Nick Saban did it very well. We saw Kirby Smart do it time after time. Urban Meyer was one of the best at managing postseasons from personal experience and from what I've seen other people do. Jim Harbaugh, as you've told me, figured out how to manage the postseason. And I think that the coaches who have the best plan and the players who follow the plan, those are going to be the teams that we go out there and say, man, they look like a championship caliber program.
All right, that's awesome, man. And gosh, what a great coach Urban is. I just principally, I'm thinking about the subtle art of the long layoff. And this year's different. It's Penn State and SMU, for example, both played in the conference title game, so it's kind of just like a bye week. It's quicker. You guys had a little bit more of a long runway, but regardless, you sprint through this season and then bang, you stop and wait. And how does a coach manage his team to then get him back ready to go for the playoffs? And again, for the winners of these games, this is new territory, because now you got to play another and then another. And you have a few before you get to the national championship. So do you think that matters, basically, is what I'm saying, is the postseason mindset and structure of how you manage your time? How big of a deal is that?
It's huge. And I thought that was what we approached really well, was kind of the ramp up. And the ramp up is very different now in the 12-team format. But you have to – I think there is this part, especially for, like Ohio State and Tennessee are two teams that didn't play in a conference championship that are playing in the first round. So they have a little bit more time than some of the teams that had to play that extra week. So part of that time should have been more focused on getting bodies right, conditioning right, staying in football shape. Then there has to be a part of this time where you say that we are in a phase where we have to focus on our fundamentals, because the first thing that happens when you have the longer layoff, any more than a week or so, tackling becomes bad. Guys on the offensive line aren't stepping in unison. The footwork for the secondary isn't as good. So you have to portion off some of that time to really get down to fundamental work. But then you have to be able to shift right into getting a game plan. And then the thing about it is, it's not the first game, right? You can get your way up to that. Then what do you do for the next game? Because coming off of the semifinal, that was a real battle for us. I mean, it was all out. Some of the players on that field, big 6'3", 230-pound running back Derrick Henry. Our guys are beat up, right? You're running down on kickoffs, like trying to run through somebody's face. Like, we were beat up. And the thing that our coach did, which I really appreciate, is he came to some of us leaders. And, once we got back to Columbus, he said, "How are you guys feeling?" And we were honest with him. Like, "Coach, we're beat up." And you know what he did? He took the pads off for practice, right? He said, "We can get putting the spiders on," because he trusted us. He felt like we were mature.
Through the whole, you didn't, before you played Oregon, you didn't have any padded practices?
I might have been like one day, but I mean, it was
wow.
The other part about that too,
I'd be nervous, to be honest with you. I'd be a little nervous about that. That's crazy to me.
The style of play of Oregon, I think, was a factor in that too. We knew that we were going to be the bully going up against them in the way that they like to play. But I think there is this idea of, do you trust your team and can you listen to them? Are they mature enough that you don't have to continue to get the physical work in? If you're a team that feels like you have to have 2 padded practices before every game, you're probably not making it through the stretch run here. That's going to be more physical load than any of your guys have ever taken in one season. It's a hard thing to try to figure out if you can handle it in real time. And so I do think that there's this, Dan Lanning will be the perfect example. Dan Lanning's the type of guy I can see walking up in the front of that room, and he goes up to Jeffrey Bassa and he goes up to Dylan Gabriel and some of his guys and says to them, "How do you guys feel?" "Coach, we don't feel that great." "Good. I have a plan for it." And he figures out how to get all of the practice reps he needs without having to bang on the front 7 and get inside drill and all that kind of stuff in. That's where I think the preparation aspect of it is going to be most difficult for coaches, is the practice plan to make sure if you're making a run that you can be where you need to be physically, but you can also get the work you need to get in to be prepared to play a game.
Yeah. That's the thing that just – it doesn't get discussed enough, where, why does a head coach make his money? And, We could talk. You and I have talked a ton about Lincoln Riley and have disagreed at times about but what is undeniable. He's a great offensive mind. He's good with X's and O's.
Right.
Football as a head coach is so much more than X's and O's, especially if you want to win at this high level. Just the decision of, do we wear pads or not? Or maybe we wear pads for half the practice or not. How do we structure our time? Because you're working under NCAA limits. How do we structure our meetings? You talk about Urban would scare you guys at first and say, you can't play with Bama, to basically encourage you to practice really, really hard, to want to prove them wrong. And then because of the work, all of a sudden he says, wait a second, they can't play with us. You're ready to go. That's why you earn $10 million, is you are steering 100+ players and 30+ staff members in the same direction towards victory.
Yep. It's the
Beautiful.
biggest thing. You're so right about that. It's not about what plays you can call. It's literally about how well you can prepare an army of men, plus all of the generals out there that are supposed to be leading them when you get into this part of the year. I'm excited to see. The last thing I'll say about the pads on, pads off thing, I do think it was a risk, but the guys in the NFL practice like that all the time.
Yeah.
You know how it gets to the late part of the season. The pads are never on. A lot of times they're just walking through, and college kids, very different from the NFL. But I think he had that level of trust in us that we could behave as professionals as we got ready to play our biggest game.
Look, I was going to say that, listen, you earned the right to take the pads off. And when you played Alabama, that was war. That was really like an NFL game, honestly, when you mentioned some of those names. It was an NFL game. You guys went to work. Coach says, good, pads off. We've seen it. You guys know you can be physical. Yeah.
Yep. And I think that goes back to training camp and building the physical mentality and just knowing what type of team you are, knowing who you're going up against. So not to get into all of that, I wanted to get to these previews. But before we did that, are there any non-quarterbacks in these first round games in particular that you think are going to be a big impact?
Maybe we can go a little back and forth here, but I look at a guy like Aiden Fisher for the Indiana Hoosiers, and I love it. You're an off-ball linebacker, so I guess you played a little bit of everything, but you could probably talk to the importance of this. Notre Dame and their run schemes, that's a dangerous team, and they can rotate and keep their backs fresh, and then you got a mobile quarterback. Aiden Fisher is the heartbeat of that defense. There's no time to miss tackles in this game, and he's going to have to communicate to I think how he leads that defense is going to be really critical to Indiana's success. If Indiana wants to win, there's going to have to be a low-scoring game. And if it is, Aiden Fisher will lead them there.
So Aiden Fisher is one of my favorite players in America. I just like his approach to linebacking. As you mentioned, he's physical. You can tell that he studies. He is always a little bit ahead of the curve. He has great footwork, never gets tangled up in the box. He knows when to stay out of the mess, when to get downhill. And it's really intriguing watching his fundamentals show up on tape, because Bryant Haynes, the defensive coordinator at Indiana, was a linebacker GA when I was playing at Ohio State. And so some of the same types of fundamentals that we had show up for them. And it's because Bryant's a great teacher. He knows how to really coach his guys. And Aiden Fisher is a great student, and he respects what the teacher is telling him. And it's a little thing, but when teams play consistently with great fundamentals, you're in for it, man. Like, it doesn't matter 5-star, 4-star, 3-star, unranked. They make it really difficult to win the ball game. Like, you have to go out and win, because they're not going to lose it for you.
I was thinking about that because, SMU is a very aggressive team, for example, almost to their own demise at times, not exactly gap sound. And I think about why Iowa has consistently been one of the best defenses. And it's like, Iowa doesn't do anything exotic, but each guy defends their patch of grass perfectly, and they're never out of position. And it's just frustrating to play them because there's just seemingly no breathing room, nowhere to go. That kind of reminds me of Indiana, how structurally sound they've been defensively.
Yeah, and I think defenses that don't get cute and don't get exotic can spend more time working on the fundamental things. They're not
There you
spending as
go.
much time
Great
teaching and
point.
installing, right, and trying to get guys to hit certain landmarks and trying to get guys to loop to the right spot. It's like I can just teach you as a defensive lineman to step and fire your hands and to stay in your gap with your outside arm and leg free. I can teach you to do that a million times instead of trying to teach you how to do a million
Like
different
that.
things. One player I'll give you out of this group would be Abdul Carter for me.
Yeah.
SMU with Kevin Jennings as their quarterback, he's a runaround guy. It makes it really difficult to defend. And we've seen Penn State do a couple things where they'll try to spy with the linebacker, whatever the case is. Abdul Carter can have something to say about all of that. If he is on his best pass rush game, if he is on his A game, none of the other what you do in the back end and how you try to keep an extra guy on him matters, right? Like you got a top tier edge rusher. Tell that man to get into a 3-point track stance, to get off the ball, and to go hunt the quarterback.
Listen, what I love about Abdul Carter, and to our viewers, when you're notice this guy chews up grass. Here's the quarterback, and he's leaving the pocket. This dude is like a cheetah hunting his prey, out in the wild. That dude chews up grass so fast, and he's done it since he's a freshman. Talk about game speed. That guy's explosive.
All right, let's talk about a couple of these first-round games that involve Big Ten teams. We will start with the one that is coming on Friday. We've got Indiana making the trip to South Bend. How do you see this one going?
Key. Cignetti has talked about can they learn from Ohio State? Okay, that game just kind of caught them off guard, and there's a few takeaways. The first one is when you're playing great teams, which Notre Dame is, your margin for error is slim. You cannot give the game away. You cannot have special teams errors. You cannot have backed up turnovers. You cannot be out of position. You cannot make boneheaded mistakes. So you always know that, but you better emphasize it more going into this game. The other thing is handle the noise. Man, this is the highest get-in price. It's going to be a night game. It's the first game of the 12-team playoff. Communication is going to be key. Defensively, we've already talked about it. Offensively, offensive line, quarterback, handle that noise. So those have been the big keys. And I look at these games too, Joshua, and how momentum plays a big factor. There's being the aggressor of, you're the one pushing momentum, okay? But then there's also responding to momentum, the other team. Like these games are going to be so emotional. This first one on a Friday night, there is going to be huge emotional swings. Can Indiana ride that wave, okay, and not get tossed off of it? I think that's the big key. What benefits them? Very veteran team, a lot of experienced players. Clearly, they've came together in unity this year. I'm excited to see them play.
Yeah, I am too. And to piggyback off of the emotional swings, like that semifinal against Alabama that I played in, we got down a couple touchdowns early, and like you can feel their crowd and how they're feeling, and our fans are a little bit deflated. You can see their sideline up, and it's like any moment you can to steal back the momentum. We did it with a trick play, and it's a reverse pass to Mike Thomas, right? Like, but anything you can do to steal back momentum and kind of get the pendulum to swing your way, I do think goes a long way in games like this. My biggest key for Indiana is to stay on schedule offensively, because I do think Notre Dame is a team that would like for you to have to throw the football. They believe in their secondary, and they think they've got good enough guys up front that they can harass the Indiana offensive line, get into the pocket and affect Curtis Rourke. So staying on schedule for me is the biggest key here. All right, we've got Penn State and SMU. This one is a noon game. It's going to be a whiteout for Penn State. What do you see as the biggest factor that could affect this game?
So SMU, an aggressive team, defensively aggressive, offensively aggressive. They're like a kid that just got his key. It's like a 16-year-old that got a sports car, where they're just gunning down the street all the time. They are aggressive to their own demise at times. So I look at Penn State, and I'm going to use the analogy like a boxer. SMU is a boxer that just continually pushes forward. That can hurt you, but if you're prepared for it, you can use that against them, and then bang, there's a counterpunch. And then because they'll get out of position. That's the key for Penn State. When you're running these outside zones, as soon as SMU gets out of position, bang, Singleton hit that gap. Drew Aller be prepared for it. Defensively, if they want to sit in shotgun all day, Abdul Carter, 3.5 sacks. Why? Says who? You can't do that. Zane Durant. That's the key there is using the aggression of SMU against them.
Yeah, I think for me, Penn State secondary better have a great plan. Those guys need to play their best game. Because there's one thing about SMU is Jennings is dangerous as a quarterback, and they've got speed everywhere. They're a fast football team. I've said that Penn State lacks elite speed in their secondary. I think guys can run away from them if they catch the ball in space. So whatever that plan looks like for them, changing up coverages. When they played Ohio State, they ran that the first pass Ohio State had, they changed up the coverage. So a guy could fall for the slant, step in front of it, like the whole deal. Those are things that they're going to have to do.
Wanted to ask you a quick follow-up on that because you've been on that with Penn State secondary for a while. Is this a game in a sense where if they do and show you something in that secondary, would your opinion potentially change on what Penn State can do in this postseason? Is that like a limiting factor that you're hoping to see addressed if they want to make a deep run? Okay. Cool.
It is a limiting factor. I think the other thing that would be the caveat to that statement is I need to see an offensive performance like what I saw against Oregon. That changed the game for me a little bit because they could match points even though their secondary was getting smoked. Yeah. Right. But if they can't bring that same type of offensive firepower, then it becomes a little bit of a which one are you going to get on a given day? Do they both happen at the same time or does neither? And that's a troubling spot to be in. All right. Final one. Tennessee. They're making their way to Old Columbus Town, the Horseshoe. They're playing Ohio State. That is the nightcap of the weekend. A lot of consternation around the Buckeyes in that program. I think Tennessee, very excited to be there. What are your thoughts?
I'm going to take that and push it back to you as your alma mater. You got the floor. Go for it.
Ohio State's a better football team than Tennessee. They're a more talented football team than Tennessee. I think at their top end, they have shown us that they can be a team that we believe can make a run in this type of playoff. Whereas at Tennessee's top end, I think they've shown that they can be a great team, but not an elite team. So I'll start by saying that Ohio State should win this football game. In the battle of the quarterbacks, why isn't Will Howard the best quarterback in this game? I think he is. Nico has had his moments. He's been a roller coaster, and he's had some outputs that have not been very great. They have leaned on that run game. Dylan Sampson, who is phenomenal, by the way, like not trying to take anything away. But I think Ohio State's game plan has to be, number one, fast start. Number two, get the weapons involved for Will Howard. Number three, a smart run game plan, right? Like I don't think your idea is going to be to try to pound it the way you did against Michigan, but certainly you have to keep some semblance of a run game to stay on schedule. And then finally, on defense, I think Ohio State has the advantage when Tennessee has the ball. But one thing that has happened is the edge rushers for Ohio State have not shown up when they're needed the most. You can't leave that secondary out there. You can't do it. You can't do it. Caleb Downs, he's really good, can't do it all on his own. I think the rush is going to have to be there. This is a game that comes down to the offensive lines and the defensive lines for either team here, because I think they can neutralize some of the advantages or disadvantages. But like the lines of scrimmage are where this is going to be won. I believe Ohio State will win it, but I ain't feeling that great if I'm being honest.
Yeah. Listen, man, it's crazy how much that loss to Michigan changed things because everything we loved about Ohio State is still there. The O-line injuries are very significant. You lost the best center in college football and a top 50 left tackle. Like, sure, but still capable and love a lot of things about their roster. So how does the O-line perform against a very capable and dangerous Tennessee defensive front? Does Ryan Day and Chip Kelly, it's the obvious thing here, can they learn from their mistakes? The game plan was atrocious against Michigan. I don't think Tennessee could play close to Michigan's ability defensively, though, to be honest. I just don't.
They're not the same. So I agree with that. That front is very good, but it's not the same as Michigan's. Right.
And of course, Michigan's going to play. The rivalry makes it different. So you have got to get Jeremiah Smith 10 touches, 10 potential touches at least, targets, reverses, screens, hitches, whatever. He's got to touch the ball. He's great after the catch too, is another thing. But I think for the Buckeyes, not just in this game, but going forward, they're going to have to ride that defense far into the playoffs. I think they've played even better since the Oregon game. The defense is elevated, like really, really lights out, suffocating, aggressive, fast, physical, everything you want.
I agree.
They got to ride that defense. That's the key.
I'll end with this. Is you and I, we sat after the Michigan game and we watched some of the all-22 copy. And there were a couple plays where, you know, it's kind of a WTF is going on, right? Like the Sonny Styles where he gets his shoulders turned and Orgy's able to bounce outside. Outside of those types of plays, guys were in gaps. They were getting knocked back when they needed to get knocked back. They're flying around to the football. Like, that was indicative to me that some of the things that, you know, narratives about not being tough enough, whatever the case, from the last couple times when they played Michigan, I don't think those exist right now. This team has every physical capability to beat any team that they would face. This right here, between the ears, the mental aspect is what will win or lose games for Ohio State in this playoff.
Completely agree. And again, like, you know, every great story, think about a great movie. Every great movie has, you need a hero, you need a villain. Every great story has road bumps. And yes, you need adversity. So for the Buckeyes, you know, that would be my mindset going into this game is, listen, we fell short, but our journey, our destiny was set long ago, and, you know, go make it happen.
All right. Well, Jake, this was, I think, some of our best work, if I do say so myself. Great storytelling on your behalf. You're going to be working this weekend. You'll be in South Bend for the Big Ten Network. So I can't wait to watch some of your coverage of that game. I'm going to be on the couch with a couple beers, hoping that Ohio State does not break my heart.
Enjoy.
But that'll do it for us right here on the Through the Whistle podcast. Once again, you can catch Jake and I every Monday through Thursday on the Big College Football Show. That is at 5 p.m. Central Time on CHSN. We'll break down what we see over the weekend the next time we're on here. Take care, guys.
Yeah.